What's up, y'all? Riley here, and today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite manga of all time, Slam Dunk by Takehiko Inoue. I'm super excited to be doing this show. I love Slam Dunk. I love Inoue. It is one of the best, not just manga, but the best comics that I've ever read. And it took me a while to kind of get this all together and get this out there, to figure out exactly what I wanted to say, but I think I've got it. And so we're going to be talking about why I believe that even 30 years later, that Slam Dunk is still not just one of the best manga of all time, but is the gold standard when it comes to shonen manga. Now, before we start talking about that, of course, I need to give a shout out to all of my Patreon subscribers. You guys are all awesome. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're watching and like what I do, please click the link down below. It'll take you to my Patreon, show you all of the benefits and extras that you get if you subscribe on there, but most importantly, the biggest benefit is you get to help me to make this channel better. Number two, huge shout out to the Omnibus Collectors Network. That is the channel where I do a ton of videos every week with a bunch of other awesome YouTubers. We talk about comics, manga, anime, video games, movies, television, anything that we want to talk about. We do tons of episodes on there every single week where we have a great time just talking about our favorite things. So if you like what I do here, you'll love what we do on that channel. And finally, if you're new to the channel, thank you so much for clicking and checking out this video. I hope you enjoy what you see, and I hope that you'll consider clicking that subscribe button down below and hitting that bell so you're notified of all the awesome videos I put out every week. I do 3 videos a week, one about manga, one doing reviews of recent single issue releases, and then a comic related video. So 3 videos every single week. Anyway, let's get started. Now, talking about Slam Dunk and talking about sports manga in general, which is a genre of manga that I've really come to love in the past several years, I have to preface all of this by noting one important thing. I'm not a sports fan. I grew up in a household where my dad tried to get me to play sports as much as he could. He grew up as a big, player and a big watcher of sports, of baseball and football particularly. And so he tried to push me into different things, and that consisted of, soccer and tennis, golf, baseball, and the one that really did actually make a bit of an impact on me when I was younger was basketball. Now, I would say that impact was mostly because at the time I was living in Houston, and this was around the championship years for the Rockets. This is when they were such a fantastic and fun team to watch. Now, I don't remember having that many good memories of actually watching basketball games or really loving playing. It was just the hype surrounding the Rockets around that time. Plus the fact that you had Michael Jordan, who was huge at this time, kind of made a perfect storm to where it was kind of beyond the actual game, and it was something bigger than just the sport. It was like watching these heroes, these characters on television. But as time would go on, I would really lose my interest in basketball and in all sports. And eventually my dad would realize, okay, maybe he's just not into sports, and he kind of let that go and let me go more into what I really did enjoy, which was art and stuff like that. I'm not saying you can't be into both things, but just for me, my life, I just didn't like it. So around 2003 was when the Shonen Jump magazine started being published in the US. And in the magazine, they did a good job of dividing between not just popular series that we already knew about, but also series that hadn't been localized yet, hugely popular ones in Japan, like Naruto, One Piece, Shaman King, stuff like that. And in almost every single monthly issue, they would also put a preview of another series that they would eventually publish in book format. And at the time, I'd never considered sports manga as anything that I would be interested in. Anytime I saw a series on the shelves of the bookstore, I kind of looked the other way, didn't think twice about it. And obviously for myself, just knowing that I wasn't into sports, it automatically translated in my head that I wouldn't care about sports manga. There was no link in my head that would say that I should care. And I think it's important to note that sports manga are a huge genre in Japan, but there's not a lot of sports comics in the US. They do exist, but oftentimes when a series focuses on a sport, that's kind of like the secondary thing. For instance, Southern Bastards by Jason Aaron is more about the crime that's happening in the town rather than about the football team. Or Sullivan's Sluggers by James Stocco is more about the fact that there's monsters and ghouls that these guys are fighting rather than the fact that they are all members of a baseball team. So I didn't have any precedents to really understand a draw towards sequential storytelling, comics or manga, dealing with sports. And to me, in my head, the idea was like, why would I care about watching a game that I don't care about watching in real life on the pages of a comic, of a manga? Now, I tried Prince of Tennis just to give it, a go, and I didn't dig it. It just didn't do it for me. And I tried a chapter of Whistle as well, the soccer manga, and it didn't do it for me either. So I just assumed at this point I was just not interested in this genre at all. And that was fine. It didn't really hurt me at all. It didn't hinder me. But then one day I read the preview chapter for the series Eyeshield 21, and something with that clicked. And I didn't know why, because of all the different sports, football was the one that was the least interesting to me. It was the one that I never played. It was the one I didn't care about watching. But for some reason, this series really did something. And so I picked up the first volume, and I read it and really enjoyed it. And I was still hesitant. I was like, should I continue reading this? Is it just a fluke? And so I even asked a friend of mine to read it and tell me, what do you think? And he loved it too. And he's like, dude, keep buying it. That series is awesome. Which I know for him was because he would read my copies of books that I bought. He would come over and on the weekends and sit down and read all my manga. So I kept buying it. And now I'm looking at the series on my shelf. I have all 37 volumes, and not only did I continue to collect and enjoy it, but while it was coming out in the US, Eyeshield was one of my favorite titles. Even though I didn't care a bit about football, I loved this manga. So why is that? Why was I enjoying something that I had no interest in? And it comes down a lot to characters and the storytelling, and I thought that this was a fluke. I thought that this was, as they say, the exception that makes the rule. I thought that I was enjoying Eyeshield, and this was probably the only sports manga that I was going to enjoy, and a lot of it was because different aspects of it had resembled the things that I enjoyed from other shonen manga at the time. So setting that aside, and maybe I should talk about Eyeshield in a different video instead of wasting time on this one when I'm supposed to be talking about Slam Dunk. Setting Eyeshield aside, I didn't try another sports manga for years, maybe even more than a decade, and I don't really remember what it was that pushed me, but there was this voice in the back of my head that all of a sudden one day was like, read Slam Dunk. Read Slam Dunk. And it was a series that I had heard about. I had heard a lot about Slam Dunk throughout the years because it is such a hugely popular title in Japan. Now, in America, unfortunately, it was first published in Raijin Comics, which was a magazine that ran monthly for about 40 issues before it was discontinued. Fortunately, unfortunate for every other Raijin comic series, but fortunately for Slam Dunk, Viz Media wound up picking it up and publishing it themselves and releasing all 31 volumes under the Shonen Jump banner. But by the time they did wind up releasing it, I was during a point where I wasn't collecting as much manga. There was a multi-year point about the time when I got into college where I stopped buying so much manga and I turned more of my focus towards Western comics. And because Slam Dunk started getting published during that time, I missed out on it. Now, the series is largely significant in Japan. And not only is Slam Dunk largely significant in Japan, but the sports manga genre is a huge part of manga in Japan, especially a huge part of the shonen manga demographic. There are always huge sports manga out there, and even one of the longest running manga of all time, Hajime no Ippo, is a sports series, a boxing series. One of the most popular manga series around the entire world, Captain Tsubasa, is a soccer series. But those things never really took off in the US. So there was never that precedence for me to expect that I would enjoy sports manga. I didn't have that knowledge about how big sports manga were and how big that genre was in Japan. Now, Slam Dunk itself is so huge, just to mention a couple things, that it is commonly noted as being one of the big factors in why basketball became so popular in the early 90s with youth. Not only is it marked as being one of the reasons for a rise in basketball's popularity, there is even a Slam Dunk scholarship that Takehiko Inoue presents to a student to pay for their tuition if they go into a school for sports. The series has also been noted multiple times over across multiple decades as one of the most influential and one of the most loved manga series in Japan. But unfortunately, it doesn't have that same recognition in the US. In the US, people who are big manga readers, big manga fans, know about the series and know why it's so great, but it never reached the same heights as a lot of other manga series out here. And I do say that one of those reasons is because the sports genre, not until very recently, it didn't really take off in America. Now we have a hugely successful manga and anime series in Haikyuu, the volleyball series. And there's been lots of other sports-related titles that have gotten a lot of attention in the US, from stuff like swimming and biking and all kinds of things. Sports manga and sports anime are finally taking a turn into relevance in America. But unfortunately, Slam Dunk missed the boat on that one. And while it is praised in America, and it even won an award for when it first started getting published back in 2008 in the US, it still never had that same relevance that it did over in Japan. So I started reading the series a few years back, and like I said, I don't remember what it was that pushed me to read it, but I had known all of the praise around it. I knew about the series. I knew a lot about the series. And something just pushed me over the edge, and I decided to go ahead one day and on a whim order the first several volumes. And I read them, and I was immediately engrossed to the point that I had to make an order for the next batch of volumes before I even finished the ones that I had. And it happened again and again and again until I read the entire series. And by the time I was getting to those last few volumes, I was speeding through each book, just hugely anticipating what was going to happen on the turn of every single page. It was to the point that I was reading a volume almost every 15 to 20 minutes when I get to those last chunk of books. It was that engrossing. But what was it that really makes it special? And that's what I'm here to really talk about, is why the series is so good, what puts it ahead of so many other titles, and why I still would consider it to be the gold standard when it comes to shonen manga. I think there are aspects that make any shonen manga great. Characters, both the protagonists and the antagonists, the conflict that we have throughout the series, the goals that our characters have, of course, the artwork, and then I think one that a lot of people forget about is pacing. So these 5 aspects are the important pieces that make up a successful story in any sort of story. We could be talking about movies, television, whatever your story format, your medium is. If you don't have great characters, a great conflict, great goals, and if you don't have great pacing, then you have nothing. Of course, when it comes to sequential storytelling, the artwork winds up being a huge aspect as well. Inoue is a fantastic artist. So we can talk about that part first, just to kind of get it out of the way, because it's going to come back around to his art eventually anyway. Slam Dunk is probably my favorite of Inoue's works, but he's also known for other titles, especially Vagabond and his other basketball series, Real. It actually isn't his only other basketball series. He did a sci-fi basketball series called Buzzer Beater as well. Real is about wheelchair basketball. I actually made a video talking about Real a couple years back, and Vagabond is a samurai title. And in all of these works, he has presented that he's truly a master of his craft, only when we're talking about the art. That's all I'm talking about right now. He has such a fantastic way of giving his characters life and individuality and expression, and such a great way of creating action through his artwork. His work is something that is so beautiful, not only when you're looking at it in the idea of a sequential story, but even if you take panels out of context, almost every single panel that he draws is something beautiful. Now, Slam Dunk is one of his earlier titles. It's not his first title, but it is, I think it's his second book that he ever had worked on, and the first one that he wrote as well as drew. And in this series, he does a lot of evolving over time, and you can see his style, his art, move from what it is the beginning, which is nothing to scoff at. He is a brilliant artist from the onset of this title, but as you go towards the end of this 31-volume series, you can see his artwork evolve over time into something that is just entirely masterful. And if you go even further and look at his more recent works, like Vagabond, you can see that he's just, simply put, an incredibly brilliant artist. But in the series, it is important for him to create these great characters. Great characters that you would attach yourselves to almost immediately. And that's something that every manga at the beginning has to come up with a great exposition. Usually you have a first initial arc that introduces you to the characters and to that world, so you can know who they are and what their motivations are. At the beginning of the series, he introduces us to our main protagonist, Hanamichi Sakuragi. Sakuragi is a little bit of an atypical high school kid. He's got bright red hair, he's taller than most of the kids in Japan, he's stronger and he's faster. And he still has the same interests as a lot of other kids, in that he's interested in girls, and he's interested in hanging out with his friends. And one day he sees this young girl who's on campus at their school, and he takes an interest in her. And in trying to impress her, he finds out that she is really into basketball. And so he tells her, "Oh, I'm a great basketball player. I am a phenom. I am this prodigy. I'm so good." And he, in his mind, he can sell it to her because he believes that given his stature and given his natural abilities, that he would be a great basketball player no matter what. So it turns out that she's actually kind of part of the basketball team. Her brother is the captain. And so she says, "Oh, well, if you're so good at basketball, then maybe you should try out. They're doing tryouts for the team." And he's like, "Yeah, sure." Because in Sakuragi's head, I'm going to be great. I'm going to be fantastic at basketball. So he goes into the tryouts and he finds out that there's a lot more to the sport than he believed. And he completely drops the ball, pun slightly intended, in trying to impress this girl. However, the team winds up taking him in because they see potential in him. They see his natural talents and his natural abilities and know that it's only a matter of teaching him what he has to do to be better. And if he gets there, he can truly be something special. He can truly be a force to be reckoned with on the team. So the series begins to follow his journey in learning about basketball, learning about the sport, and learning how to play. And that's a major point about the series, is that we're following, as the audience, this guy who literally doesn't know anything about basketball, about the sport, which is really great because if you're part of the audience who doesn't know anything about the rules of the game or how to play or what the fundamentals are, throughout the series, they teach you those things as you are reading. So I say that to mention that if you are not familiar with anything to do with basketball, you don't have to worry. And the same thing happened over in Eyeshield. Senna, the main character, knows nothing about football, but they take him in because of his natural abilities. So this is kind of a trope. They take him in because of his natural abilities and decide we can teach him about football. You can't teach those natural abilities, but you can be taught the rules of the game and how to play. So throughout that series, I didn't know anything about football, but I learned all of the fundamentals. I learned the rules of the game, and it helped me to enjoy it. The same thing happens here. In the way that Inoue presents the sport in the series is a way that he's assuming most people reading it might not be entirely familiar with the sport. So as Hanamichi is learning, we're also learning. As he becomes better at the sport, we understand more about the sport. And there's a whole host of amazing characters in this series. All the team members that Sakuragi finds himself with, the coach, the team members from other teams, from other schools. So many interesting characters. And Inoue has such a great ability to make sure that you care about every single one of these characters, that you learn not only about their motivations on the court, but about who they are off the court and what their motivations are outside of the sport. Whether their motivations outside the sport are to be better at this or to succeed elsewhere, or what they're dealing with in their personal lives, in their home lives. Inoue makes sure that we relate to every single character, that we understand what they go through. We understand the conflicts, and that brings me to another one of my points, conflict. There are conflicts with every single one of these characters, and in understanding those conflicts, it drives us to have a closer relationship with each of those characters. This is something that every story needs to do, every manga needs to do, and a lot of manga are really successful at crafting these things, at introducing a huge array of characters and making you understand the motivations and the conflicts that each one of these characters have. And of course, these conflicts that they deal with all lead towards, another one of my points, their goals. You have to have a great goal that's set in front of the group of characters. And in this series, and in a lot of sports series, the way that it works is that the team has their own goal, which is to be the best and to win the national championship or to win the regionals or whatever the case is. They want to be the best team. But each individual player has their own individual goals as well. Whether that be a personal goal of wanting to form a relationship with someone, or wanting to become better at something, or wanting to grow stronger themselves in some sort of aspect. Every character that you're introduced has their own individual goals that they're working towards. And if you don't introduce those individual goals for each character, if we didn't see the individual goals of each member of the Straw Hat Pirates in One Piece, then we wouldn't care about their individual journeys, and we would care less about their journey to get to the end of the Grand Line. Just like here, if we didn't know about these individual characters' conflicts and their goals, they would matter less as part of the Shohoku High basketball team, and their victories that they earn would mean less to us. Now, one of the great things about sports series is that when you look at the characters, you don't have to create an antagonist that is necessarily this force of evil, like you would when looking at a shonen fighting manga. When you look at something like Dragon Ball Z, Toriyama has to create a really evil villain in Frieza, in Cell, to make the conflict that they're having with the protagonists something interesting, where you are rooting for the protagonists. You're rooting for Goku and Vegeta and all of their crew to succeed in fighting against this super powerful antagonist, because you want to see them win against the guy who wants to take over the world or destroy the world or kill everyone or whatever the case may be. And this is true in all the different shonen series. In a sports manga, you don't have to make an evil antagonist. You can create an antagonist that is just as good and as interesting as any character that is on your team of protagonists. And that's something that I think that Inoue does really well in this series, is providing antagonists to the Shohoku High basketball team that you wind up also wanting to root for. And this is something that was also present in Eyeshield, is that you're introduced to these other teams, these other characters that you wind up caring about, and you want to see success for those other characters. So it leads towards your own internal conflict as the reader in what happens when those characters that you care about from the other team wind up having to face off against the characters that you already care about from the main team. It's such a great tactic in storytelling, because you're causing the reader to have to choose a side when they don't want to. And it's making for a situation where whoever winds up coming on top, you'll probably wind up being happy with the result no matter what. Because it's not about that final result, it's about seeing the head-to-head competition between these teams, between these characters. And it's about seeing how they evolve and how they develop as characters themselves and through their strengths to overcome the adversity of this other team. But now you're focusing on the sides of both teams and how characters from that other team are also developing and becoming stronger and learning how to face off against adversity. And it's something that makes a lot of sports series, as I've learned over the past several years reading a lot more sports manga, it's something that really makes them special, is that you become connected to more characters because there's really not always a bad guy. There are the bad guys, of course. They do sometimes characterize, other teams or members of other teams as these forces of evil. But oftentimes, if the writer is a great one, they're going to delve further into that character to make you understand their motivations, and that they're not evil. They've just been formed into being this way. They've become this character because of the factors around them that have pushed them to be this way, but they still have similar goals to the characters that we're looking at. And in their eyes, our protagonists might seem like the bad guys to them. And now this brings me around to my final point about what really makes a great story, and this is the strongest thing that I believe that Inoue has done in Slam Dunk. And it's something that I think a lot of people completely forget about when they're thinking about storytelling, because it's easy to gloss over, and that's pacing. Pacing is such an important factor in telling your story, especially when it comes to sequential storytelling. If you do not have the right pace, you lose your audience. And now you can lose the audience by going too fast with your pace or by going too slow with your pace. If you're going too fast, then you're zooming through all the action, you're zooming through all the story so that your audience can't absorb what's actually going on and what they need to absorb to understand the story that you're trying to tell them. But if you go too slow, you lose the energy from your audience. You take them out of the story because something that should be happening across a small amount of time is now taking much longer to play out, and you lose them in that. But Inoue, I think in this aspect, is where he proved in this series how much of a master he is of his craft, in that he perfectly, absolutely perfectly paces this story so that you feel like you're right there watching the game. It feels like you are watching the buzzer count down the seconds on the clock. It feels like you are there, heart pounding with anticipation, seeing who is going to make the last basket and who is going to come out on top. I mentioned earlier that I was reading through those last few volumes 15 to 20 minutes apiece, because Inoue's pacing in this series is so immaculate that he had me following along at the perfect pace, or I was absorbing every bit of information he was feeding me, and I was doing it at exactly the right rate and exactly the right pace that he had intended. It never was too slow. It never lost me. It never went so fast that I didn't get what was happening and had to turn back a few pages to see it again. I did turn back a few pages because I knew exactly what was happening and I wanted to re-experience it, which is a completely different thing, but I never felt lost. There are so many manga, and ones that I love, that never get this right. There are so many series that push you too fast to where you can't see what's happening. You can't process what happened. You have to go back to reread to understand, oh, that's what just happened in this fight. There are so many series and ones that I legitimately love and care for that just don't master this. So many creators that never master pacing in the same way that Inoue did. And that he did not in his third or fourth series, but in his first series that he did both the story and art for. And I think that that just shows how much of a master he is of his craft, how much of an amazing creator that he is, that he can bring you along for the journey, that he can invest you into it so much. I felt like I could literally hear the squeak of the sneakers on the floor while reading these books. That's how invested and how perfectly done this story was. Now, why do I say this makes it the gold standard? What does that mean? That's not to say that there hasn't been great manga since then. That's not to say that there's no other good shonen manga, that everyone else gets it wrong. But I think that Slam Dunk and Inoue, with all of these things that he combined, he created something that is a perfect storm of a series. It has characters that you get invested in quickly, who are extremely relatable. It has conflicts that you care about, both on and off the court. It has artwork that is just perfect and amazingly beautifully done, where every character is individualized so you never get confused between who's who. And his pacing is some of the best that I've ever seen in any storytelling. And if other series can even match just a few of those aspects to as well as Slam Dunk did it, then they will be largely successful. I'm hoping with this video, in talking about the series, that you can see how much I loved this manga. And I'm not kidding when I say this is one of my absolute favorite, not just manga, but comics of all time. This is such an amazing series, and Inoue has done such a great job with this title in giving us some of my favorite characters now in all of storytelling. The main thing, though, that I want to end this video on is saying something about a storyteller. A good writer, and this can be for manga, for comics, for books, movies, whatever. A good writer will take something that you're interested in and craft a good story out of it. Craft a story with characters that you care about, that you want to see from start to end. But a great writer will take something that you do not care about, something that you could not care less about. A great writer can take a character that you have zero interest in and tell you a story that moves you, tell you a great story that makes you interested in this character, that makes you interested in this concept. And that's what Inoue does here. I did not care about basketball for years. I didn't care about basketball for probably half of my life before I finally read this series. I didn't think I would care. I was under the impression that since I didn't care about the sport, it was going to take a lot for me to become invested. But Inoue is such a great storyteller that he completely circumvents all of that and made me invested immediately. And this is something that holds true, like I said, for any other medium. This is something that I hold true when it comes to Western comics. I don't believe there are bad characters at all. A good writer will make you care about any character, will make you care about any villain or supervillain or superhero or whatever the case may be. A great writer will invest you in that character even if you did not care about them at all before. Takehiko Inoue is one of the greatest writers in any medium. And he is a master in manga, and he is a master in sequential storytelling. If you haven't read Slam Dunk yet, I highly recommend it. Obviously, through everything I've been saying in this video, it is one of the finest pieces of graphic literature. Now, I hope that in all of this I can inspire some people to try the series out for the first time, and I'm really hoping that I'm not just full of it here and those people who try the series for the first time don't come back to me saying, oh man, I hated this. But that's okay. It means a lot to me, and it's something that I felt very strongly about and felt like I had to put out there in a video, and I had to talk about this. So I hope that this video is successful in what I wanted to do, and I hope again that if you've never read the series, that this inspires you to maybe pick up a few volumes and try it out. Anyway, I know this is a long video, so I'll go ahead and wrap it up now. Thank you so much everyone for watching and spending your time with me. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, I hope you'll consider doing that. Hit that bell so you'll be notified of all the awesome content that I put out every single week. And otherwise, I will see you guys on the next one. Peace out.